Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masechta Zevachim daf Sadi Tes. We are going to begin on Sadi Chesed Beis by the new Mishnah, the new parak. Tvul Yoim u'mechusar Kippurim einin cholkin b'kodshim le'echel arev. So there is a distinction between a Tvul Yoim and a mechusar Kippurim. Someone who is tamei, so they have to go to the mikvah at a certain point, let's call it the seventh day, and then they are going to await Erev Shemesh, and then once the sun sets, as the very first Mishnah Brachos tells us, then they're allowed to eat truma. However, if they also have a chiyuv to have to bring karbanos on the eighth day, which is called their mechusar kippurim, they're missing the kapara, so then, of course, they are not able to eat kachim until they accomplish that. So when it comes to either of these, we say that we do not divide kachim l'echel ba'arev, for them to eat it at night. And Rashi says, logically, why not? Hoyel ve'ein roin lachila. Because they're not able to eat it yet. They're, again, allowed to eat truma, but not kachim. And therefore, we're not going to divide it for them now. Says Rashi, in cholkin lechel arev likashi taharu, so that they'll eventually become tahar and they'll have it available. No. If right now they're tamei, we do not separate it for them. Oinain, regarding the din of an oinain, which is someone whose seven closest relative dies, and it's mamish this day that of the death. So noigeya ve'eno makriv. So it literally, it says they touch, but they cannot be makriv. What does that mean? So that actually was discussed previously on Tes Zayin Amud Aleph. Let's see if we could quickly go back to that to remind ourselves of Tes Zayin Amud Aleph regarding this din of an oinain. So the Gemara says, again, regarding an oinain, so this is actually the Mishnah at the beginning of a different parak, of parak Kol Zevachim Shekibul Daman. It says, Kol Zevachim Shekibul Daman Zar Onain Tvul Yoim B'chusar Kippurim B'chusar Gadim, etc. It's puzzle. So basically, if an oinain does the avoda, in that case it will be puzzle. And the Gemara over here on Tes Zayin Amud Aleph as how do we know that's true? It says regarding a kohen gadol that he's not allowed to leave as an onain, which is mashma ha'acher shlo yatsa chilel, mashma that a kohen hedget who doesn't leave will be machalel the avoda. So we see clearly from here that there is a prohibition for an oinain to do the avoda. So that's a clear indication. And there's other sources of how we know that. Okay. Okay. So that's the source of there. So again, we know when it comes to an oinain, they're not allowed to do kohen hedget's not allowed to do the avoda, and therefore v'enu makriv v'enu cholkin erev. We don't allow them to do the avoda, and we don't divide it also for them to eat in the evening, again because they're not fit to eat or even to do the avoda. Bali mumin, when it comes to someone who is a bal mum, so bein bali mumin oivrin, bein bali mumin kavuin. So it's interesting. It doesn't make a difference if it's a bal mum, a blemish, which is basically here and staying, or one which is going to leave. It's only a temporary blemish. Nonetheless, we will allow a bal mum kohen to be able to eat kachim. Avalo makrivin. However, a bal mum, as we know, is not allowed to do the avoda. Okay. Koshin royal avoda inu chayil b'basar. And this almost sounds like a repetition, but it's more of a general rule. Anyone who's not fit to do the avoda, we do not divide basar. Now, Rashi immediately picks up. It sounds to be an absolute steer to what we just said, because a Baal Mum, who is not fit to do the avoda, we do divide. We are cholkin v'oichlin. So it almost sounds, again, like a contradiction of the Mishnah. And of course, the Gemara is going to ask that and address that. Then the Mishnah says, anyone who is not entitled to the basar, there's no hide either that is accompanied with it. Even if, let's say, we're dealing with impurity at the time of the zrikas adam, the tar b'shas hektar chilavim. However, even though they were tamei, now all of a sudden they're tahar at the time of the sacrificing of the fats and limbs. Enochok b'basar. Shnemar hamakrives dam hashlomim v'eschela b'bnei Aaron lo tiyeh shokim min lomana. So the pasuk links the basar, the dam hashlomim, which is the zrika, and the chelim. So it's necessary that in order to be able to be entitled to the basar, it's, even though it's true, maybe now you're tahar, but it has to be the b'shas rikas damim that you are also tahar. So this person who is tamei b'shas rikas damim, even though they became pure at the time of hektar chilavim, nonetheless they do not get a portion of the basar. Okay, so with that said, let's continue with the Gemara on Daf Tzadi Tes Amud Aleph. So Minahan Mili. So how do we know this? And we're going to have to go back to the Rashis on the previous Amud in a second. Omer Shlachish Demerkok, because the pasuk says, and let's see the pasuk in its entirety in Sefer Vayikra above. Hakayin Hamachati Yaisa Yoichlena. So the kayin who is engaged in the avoda will eat the carbon, or the parts designated to be eaten by kayin. B'makam kadosh, it has to be done in the proper location. Ti'achal b'chatzar o moed. Okay, so when it says a kayin machate, it's referring specifically to the, as Rashi says in the previous Amid, zerikas dam, one who actually does the zerikas hadam, so that person is allowed to eat it. She'enu machate enu oichel, which means if he doesn't do the avoda, then he's not entitled to eat. V'klolahu, is that true? Is that a general rule that if you didn't do the avoda, or maybe you're not shaykh to do the avoda, that you're that which we'll say in the teretz, that if you don't do the avoda you can't eat? V'klolahu v'hari mishmar kua de'ein machaten v'oichlin. If we're dealing with, so again, this is just a general question that, as Rashi says down on the top, Lo zarku asedam el echad zark al yedei kuon. So you have an entire base of a bunch of people. They're not all doing the zrikas. One guy, one of the kohanim, is doing the avoda, but yet everyone's allowed to eat from it. So what do you mean only the one that does the zrika could eat? So it means roy l'chitu kamrinan. It has to be not necessarily the one who does the avoda, but everyone who potentially could do the avoda, even if you weren't picked to do it. But if you didn't, even if you didn't do this rika, but you're fit to do this rika, then you're allowed to eat. That's actually what it means. So we seem pretty satisfied with that, but that's also not so clear, because we know when it comes to a katan, who obviously is puzzled to do the avoda, because the pasuk, as Rashi says, is ish mizar chaladarasam. It has to be an ish. You have to be a man to be able to do the avoda. If you're a katan, you're not shaykh. But nonetheless, we do allow a katan to be able to eat. Obviously, we're talking about a kohen. El ma'yachlena yichaklena. When it means, what does it mean eat? It means divided. And Rashi says, umahalcha nafkalan mastis and negatani tivolyon enu choylek. Royal chitui choylek. Shen royal chitui enu choylek. We're not coming to exclude a katan over here, but it basically means to be able to be the one who does the division of everything. And of course, the father would be the one who would be involved in that process. But at the end of the day, the katan is allowed to eat. But it's really just coming to exclude a tful yoim in our Mishnah, because they're not fit to be able to do the avoda, or someone's mechusar kippurim is not fit to do the avoda. So therefore, because of that, he's not choylek. So hari bal mum, what are you talking about? A bal mum is able to be chaylik, even though they can't do the avoda. Yal Baal Mum Rachmana Ribuya. Kol Zachar B'Kohanim Rabbis Baal Mum. You're right. We do have this general rule, but the reality is there's exceptions, and the reason why we're allowed to have an exception is when the pasuk gives it. So even though it's true, a Baal Mum obviously cannot do the avoda, but that's not going to say that he cannot be chaylik, because the pasuk includes him. This klal is just really coming to exclude Tvul Yoim and Mechusar Kippurim. The Ema, why don't we say it differently? Kol Zachar Rabbis Tvul Yoim. Why don't we actually say that Kol Zachar is coming to include a Tvul Yoim? We'll be able to eat at night and be able to be chaylik, at least not be able to eat, but at least to divide it up so he can eat it later. No, Mistabra Baal Mum Havilu Riba Shechein Oichel. So it makes more sense because the Baal Mum is tahar. So why can he be chaylik? Because he's going to be able to eat it also. Someone who is still tamei, okay, big deal dividing it up, but he can't eat it. So maybe for that reason is a good reason to not say we should include him, like our Mishnah says. No, Adarabba. Tvul Yom Havil Riboy Del Urta Mechsechazi. Right now, fine, he's not able to do the avoda, but he will eventually be able to do the avoda. So this guy, just a matter of a short amount of time, he'll be able to do the avoda again. This guy who is a Baal Mum will never be able to do the avoda. It's a Baal Mum Kavua. So maybe we should not allow the Baal Mum and allow the Tvul Yom. No, Hashdemiya Halochazi. We're not looking at what his potential is. We look at who you are right now. And who you are right now is someone who's Tameh. So therefore, we're going to exclude you, but include the Baal Mum. Okay. Good. So there's a bunch of questions here, but let's keep go a little bit further. Rabbi Yosef Omer Michli, let's see. Ma yochelena yechaklena. What does it mean? Eating it means dividing it. So lichta rachmana yechaklena. So that's what the pasuk should have said. Ma yochelena, why does it say that language? Shmamina royal achil chaylik. It just means someone's fit to eat. Shen royal achil eno chaylik. So that's the whole point. He's bringing it out. Is that why does the Torah go out of its way to say eat? If all we're doing is dividing it, is because it means it has to be someone who's fit to eat it. Who's fit to eat? A Baal Mum. Who's not fit to eat? Tvul Yom Mechusar Kippurim. Boy Reish Lakish. Baal Mum v'hu tamei mahu shiachloku. Lo kivan doli chazi v'rachmana Rabbi Eloshna mali tama mali Baal Mum. So if you have a Baal Mum, someone has a mum, we allow him to divide and to eat it. Now, since we already have a reboy for a Baal Mum, maybe that's even if he's tamei. Odilma royal achila chaylik shein royal achila eno chaylik. No, but even though it's true, we have a reboy for the pasuk that he can be chaylik, this Baal Mum, but at the same time, we need him to be able to be fit to eat it at the b'shas the division, and he's not able to. So Amuramba Tashma, Kohen Gadol Makribainin, as we saw already previously in the previous parak, that as a Kohen Gadol, he is required, unlike the Kohen Hedjit, who's not allowed to do the avoda while he's an Oinain, a Kohen Gadol does. Ve'enu oicha ve'enu chaylik, u'echel arav shma mina, royal achil b'ina shma mina. He does not eat, obviously, because he is in the status of an Oinain, and he's not chaylik echel arim. So what do we see? Royal achil b'inan. He has to be someone who's fit to eat. So even though he is, says Rashi, v'enu chaylik le'echel meb'erev l'kesheyifter mi'ani nasai, when he's no longer an oinain. Alma afagav the karinan hamachati oisa, even though the kohen gadol does the zrika, lo polig the akar chaluka b'achila tali. It's all tali on his ability to eat right now. As we said, because it says the language of achila. Hilkach. Man demaisa rayim abal mum kaidim tuma the plig yafa de in royal chitoi mahu taima boyas riboy afal achar tuma lavrayahi. The royal achila toli has to be someone who's fit to eat. V'lo royal chitoi, not someone who's just fit to do the zrika. Ubal mum below tuma royal achilahu. So bal mum, without tuma, he is allowed to eat. Okay, fine. So again, that is the question which has been resolved. Okay, so basically, a bal mum we're allowed to be machalik, but only if he's tar, not if he's tameh. Boy Rabbi Ishia, tameh bekarbanai sibor mahu shiachal kolai. If let's say we're dealing with karbanos sibor, in which we have a leniency in general of tuma hutta b'tzibura, so what is the din when it comes to a carbon sibor? That we say, well, it's all Tolyan Zrika, and this guy does the Zrika, because again, when it comes to Karbana Sibor, we'll do the Avoda, even if it's Tuma, so therefore maybe he could be Machal. Or Dilma, when it comes to, even though it's Tuma Hutu B'Sibura, Dilma Royal Achil Chaylik, Shin Royal Achil Chaylik. So there could be a distinction between doing the avoda, batoma, and then also the fact is you're tummy, so you can't eat it. So Ravin Tashma, Kohen Gadol Makravainin, as we said, a Kohen Gadol could do the avoda. So again, we see from the Kohen Gadol the same idea, is that someone who is a Kohen Gadol can do the avoda but doesn't eat. So too, even though it's true, Tuma Hutta B'Tzibur, and you can do the avoda, doesn't mean there were chaylik. Okay, let's look at a few questions. Question 13 is 4 parts. Ma dinim shel kohanim l'chalek b'kachim v'l echol. Kohen balmum. So kohen balmum is chaylik v'oichel, and that we saw from a riboy. Kohen gadol oinein. Even though he could do the avoda, he is not chaylik v'oichel. Kohen tameh b'karban sibor. We learn out from the Kohen Gadol also is enu chaylik v'yoichel. And it says yekrivu tahayirim. Okay. Or in a Kohen katan, he's not chaylik, but of course he could eat. Okay. Because he's there's not an issue with him as far as anything except his age for him to do the avoda, but of course he's allowed to eat, but he's not chaylik. Okay, all right, so that was question 13. Let's look at question TA 19. If you're not fit to do the zrika sadam, we're not chaylik. Lemute man, who's that coming to exclude? That's coming to exclude a katan. That what? Because eno choylik afal pi shiroy lachila. So he's not fit to do zrika. He cannot be choylik, even though he's fit to do an achila. That's a katan, because a katan is royal chalik, but not a royal achila. Vein royal achila eno choylik lemut iman. It says someone who's not fit to eat. So that's coming to exclude a kohen gadol who's an oinen, and a tameh b'karban sibor. So even though the avoda can be done, but we don't allow, because they're either the kohen gadol is an oinen, or because and therefore he cannot be chaylik, or by the case of tameh b'karban sibor. Okay. Let's see if there's another question here. Yeah, question TB 22. Let's get that down too. Katan balmum tv'oyim him cholkim b'kadshim. So katan oichlin v'lecholkim. That's correct. Balmum cholkin v'oichlin. Tv'oyim v'lecholkin v'oichlin. Tv'oyim. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, let's put this over here. TB 22. Okay. All right, let's keep moving. So then the Mishnah says, "Oinin noigeya ve'enu makriv." So this is again not talking about a kohen gadol. A kohen hedjed, as we saw already, is who's one of his 7 relatives died. So the din is that he doesn't do the avoda, but he could touch kachim. We don't have an issue with him touching kachim. So oinen nagea. So we're telling me that he could touch or minhi. I'll ask you a question. Oinen mechusik Purim srichin tvila l'kodesh. It says beferish that in Maseches Chagiga that if you're an oinen or a mechusik Purim, you need tefillah before you eat kodesh. Now, again, this doesn't mean the time before. This is a chumrah, as Rashi says, boy b'yoyim de'aninus batzir mechad yoyma leisa. Basically, you are toivel on the seventh day. You achieve erev shemesh, and maybe now you can eat truma, but you cannot eat the carbon. You cannot eat kachim until you are mechusik kippurim. You have to then bring a carbon. But interestingly enough, if you're a mechusik kippurim, the Mishnah in Chagiga says you also then have to be toivel again to eat kodesh, but an oinin as well. Now, why is it necessary for an oinin to be toivel? It must be that he's still tamei, and he's tamei on some level, and therefore because of that he shouldn't be able to touch kachim. So Rabbi Yochanan l'kasha kan b'shetaval kan b'shloi taval. What does that mean? So it's not what we said before, that if you were toivel from before, so you don't have to toivel again. But this is talking about a situation where there was no tefillah done prior, so then it's necessary for you to tefillah now. So v'chi tovel my havi, you understand? If you did tefillah, ha hadro leha ninus. So let's say you did tefillah before, but then you became an oinen, the Amar Rabba Rav Huna, oinen shetavel ninuso chayzer salav. Doesn't help because you're still an oinen. So after your ninus, you should still have to be toivel, and therefore the question still stands. It must be that there's some element of tumah for some reason. Doesn't mean that you actually came in contact with any of your zayin kroibim, but there's still some element of tumah of some sort. We'll see why in a second. That you have to be toivel. So lokasha had asach daite had asach daite. It's all told in hesach hadas. Says Rashi. Why do you have to be toivel again by an oinin? It's only been asach daite, mishmir skufo. If you diverted your attention from protecting your body from becoming tamei, and you don't know that you became tamei, but you just weren't really focused on it, since you weren't allowed to eat kachim on that day because you're an oinen, so therefore we are concerned that you probably had hesach hadas from keeping your body tahor to be able to eat kachim, because you're like, I don't have to eat kachim anyway, so I'm not going to be so careful. And therefore, if that was the case where you had hesach hadas, that's when you have to be toivel. But our Mishnah, which says you could touch, is because you never lost your diverting your attention, never had hesach hadas, and therefore it's okay. So hesach hadas shushiv shvi boy. You understand? If you had hesach hadas, so that's shaykh that you became tamei meis, and then you would need much more than just a mikvah. Yom Rav Yostoi B'Rav Masoin Rav Yochanan hesach hadas arachas shushiv shvi. Right, again, you need to be sprinkled with the mechatas on days 3 and 7. Lokasha hadi asach daiti matami meis, hadi asach daiti matami sheretz. So it's an interesting split, right? So I didn't divert my attention from. I didn't have hesach hadas from tumas meis. If I did, you're right. I would need tumas. I would need to be sprinkled. I need hazon shlish and shvi. But no, I know I didn't come in contact in any way with a mace. But it is shaykh a different level of Tumah Sheretz that maybe I did, in which I would need to be toivel. So Tummy Sheretz, Tummy Malyahu, Erev Shemesh boy. Why would you, in that case, just because you had hesach hadas only for Tumah Sheretz, but going to the mikvah is not enough to remove yourself of Tumah Sheretz, you need the whole day. You have to wait until the next night. But then furthermore, I feel Truma Nami. Also when it comes to Truma, right? In order, says Rashi, Liboy Tefillah. When it comes to that, if you had hesach hadas for tumas sheretz, then you would even need to be toivel for truma, not just for eating kachim. So this person really splits hairs, and this is from Chagiga, third parak. So actually, I protected myself from anything that could make other people tameh. However, I didn't protect myself from something which could make me tameh and not further levels of tumah. Says Rashi, Haposlani lachilas kodshim midrabanan dulu bo erev shemesh. So therefore, on this lower level, you would not need erev shemesh. V'chein legabi truma ba'emer lo nishmarti medaber haposlani b'truma. Shinu dechika hu. And this is not going to be the maskana, but that's what we're basically saying is, I didn't have hesach hadas for tumas mace, so I don't need shlishi v'shvi. I didn't have hesach hadas for shares, but actually, what ended up happening was my hesach hadas was only for things that will make me tameh, but I will not make other things tameh. If you look in this Taisus, Hakar Sina Hundred Hesach Daite Hesach Hadas Possible Kachim. Which is really the same thing as what Rashi said. Okay, ayin taisus. Fine. Fine. So the question is, mi'ika nitirusa lapalga. Do we ever find such a thing where a person is careful halfway? So this is almost verbatim from Chagiga. Vasanya. And I'll prove this to you. If the basket is still upon your head, and you have a shovel inside. Says Rashi, Kli barzahu v'roisho rachav. It's the head of it is wide. Mavdilim by groigris hanavukais zubazu. Basically, the purpose of this kli is to be able to detach. If you have these very hard, dry figs that are attached to one another, that was the purpose of it. V'yomer libi al sal. My thoughts are on the basket, and I'm protecting the basket. Then libi al hamagrifa. However, I didn't really put much thought onto the shovel from it becoming tameh. So it's sal tar hamagrifa tameh. Because your focus was only on the basket, so the basket is tahar, but the shovel is tameh. So we see that it's possible you could split in half. So whereas, I understand, if the basket is tahar, but the shovel is tameh, but the shovel is inside the basket, so the tetameh grateful itzal. This is like this is Tumah 101 here. So why don't we say that the shovel, which is a kli, will be matam this other kli? No, in kli matam a kli. Okay, so the basket's going to remain. But there's food inside. So a kli cannot be matama a kli. But a kli could be matami oichud mashkin. So Rabbi, you're right, normally, but ba'oimer shemartiyam adavar hamatamei avlo shemartiyam adavar hapaisla. I guarded it from anything that could, from something which could make it tamei, but I did not guard it from something in which could passel it, right? So, in other words, you can't make the food tameh in this case. So igalgel milsa matila kameh. So this matter kind of unfolded a bit, and the matter was brought in front of Rav Abba bar Mamel. Rav Yochanan, did you not know the important statement of Rav Yochanan Rav that he said, "Ha'eichel shlishi shel truma," a person who ate a shlishi of truma. Now, truma, when it comes to the basic timeline, if you will, the protocol of tuma, a mace is an avi avos tuma. If a person like myself would touch it, I would become an av. If I would touch other mekalim, so that becomes a rishon, and then that rishon could be matama oichun mashkin, but then that stops. It passels. It can't go any further, except when it comes to truma. Truma, if oichun mashkin, which is a sheni, touches truma, it can make the truma. It'll passel it to the level of shlishi, but it does have the capacity to mimatami kodshim on a revi level. So oichel shlishi shel truma. So truma, which had the shlishi status, also echol umuter liga. You're not allowed to eat it, but you can touch it. Why are you not allowed to eat it? Because it's tameh. Why are you allowed to touch it? Because it cannot do anything, right? But you touching it is not a problem. Alma mechila avad rabbanan malia, benegil avad rabbanan mala. So look in Rashi. Betruma, you're allowed to touch it because it's a shlishi. Deinu nasa gufa el shlishi, kamo hamaychel, she'achol v'asu lechel truma. So the worst that can happen is that you could become maybe like it, right? Aval motaliga, you can touch it. Aval alma milas avad rabbanan bechila delisnu benegia. We said that there are certain prohibitions when it comes to eating which don't apply to touching. Why do we say that he needs to be immerse himself? It's only bechila tanan, only when he wants to eat. If all he wishes is to touch the kachim, he doesn't need tefillah. So that's the basic answer. Okay, all right. Let's look at question 14. Oinein noigev eno makriv kasha medatnan oinein mechusik kippurim srichen tefillah kaidish. So we said that he needs tefillah only for eating. Sarach tefillah lachila avol maga will abed rabbanan mala. This is what we said before. Okay, beautiful. All right, let's keep on moving. The enu choyel echol. So when it comes, going back to our Mishnah, when it comes to this oinein, he could touch kachim. He's not allowed to obviously do the avoda as a kohen hedget, and also he's not choyel echol erev. So even though it's true, tomorrow he'll be able to eat, but we're not going to be choyel right now for him at the status of a ninos. So miflag hu deloy polig. Now, we're not going to divide it for him now because he's still an oinen. However, tonight, when he's no longer an oinen, we could invite him to eat because he's no longer an oinen. So we're just not going to divide it now. But we should be able to allow him to eat kachim that night. Raminhi, fact the Gemara, oinen, and then parentheses, b'chosek kippurim, toivel, so an oinen is allowed to immerse himself, and then he can eat the carbon pesach that night. So it's interesting. We make a distinction between carbon pesach that we're lenient, but not by kachim. Now, why by pesach are we lenient? And Rashi points out why we remove the girsa of mechusar kippurim, the insarach lahamtin la'erev. Okay, maybe okay, but we allow when it comes to the carbon pesach that you're allowed to eat it that next day, even though you're an oinen. Says Rashi, "Ksavar aninus laila derabanan," because aninus is only derabanan. Yaninus deraisa, chad yoimahu. It's only one day, as we said before in Rashi. Achrisim kiyamar. It's brought down Mestach the Sukkah as well, and Amos. The Gabi Pesach lo hamidu divrei b'makom kares. So when we're dealing with the carbon pesach is unique among other karbanos because there's a chiv kares if you don't eat it, and therefore because of that, even though at night he has a tumah d'Rabbanan, we say d'Rabbanan, we're not going to say he can't eat this carbon because he's going to end up losing out and he'll end up being chayiv kares. Gabi kachim hamidu devrehim b'makam asay de'achilus kachim kamrinan. Now when we're dealing with kachim, that's an asay, and therefore the asay is not going to be removed. In other words, we will adhere to it. So in other words, like this: if you're an oinein, so you're allowed to eat the carbon pesach at night because since there's kares against it. So therefore, we're going to allow him to not violate kares, but not to violate an asay. That much we're not as concerned of. Anyway, this is the kasha. The kasha clearly is that when it comes to kachim, an oin's not allowed to. You can't give it to him that night. So Rabbi Yirmiyah medifni lo kasha kan bepesach kan b'shari mois hashana. One is during Pesach itself, and the other one is during the rest of the time of the year. But Pesach. So on Pesach, since you're already allowing the guy to eat the carbon Pesach, so we're already lenient when it comes to his status, because it's again the aninus who's at night is only the Rabbanon. So we're lenient when it comes to the Karban Pesach. So once he's already in the Karban Pesach, he needs the other Karbanos. However, the other times, if he's not fit, he's not fit. Umay aval of a lo bekachim shall kol hashana. It means for the rest of the year. Okay, so that's the explanation. All right. Rav Asi Yomer lo kasha gives a different explanation. Not that we're going to make a distinction between Pesach, where we're more lenient for him to be able to eat the Karban Pesach and other Karbanos, as opposed to the rest of the year. Lo kasha kan shemes lo meis ba'arba asar. The mace died. His relative died on the 14th day of Nisan. The Kavru ba'arba asar, and actually the Kfur also took place then. Kan shemes lo meis b'shloish asar. The death took place on the 13th. V'karva ba'arba asar, and he buried him on the 14th. Yom Kavura l'tafis leilu midrabanan. So aninus is really again the day the person died, not the day of the Kavura. So the 14th is only midrabanan, so he could eat that night. Look in Rashi. Edi b'layla psachim lo kasha. He the psachim shemeis b'yadav v'karva yadalid hilchim b'pesach oichel of lo b'kachim. Yaninus allowed the Yomi said Rabbanon. Umas Nisin says Rashi Kishmesh b'yod gimel. The Yom Kavura gufi the Rabbanon. The Laila lo tafis afil the Rabbanon. So it's not even a Rabbanon on that. Okay. So man tana aninus laila Rabbanon. Who's the tana that says that aninus during the day is deraisa, however that night is only the Rabbanon? Rav Shimon he decided aninus laila medivrei Torah, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Shimon omer oinen enu medivrei Torah el medivrei seifrim. So again, it's actually a machlokas whether or not that night is considered to be has a din of a din deraisa Rabban Teda. I'll prove to you that this is the case. Shahari amru oinen tful. Why would it be that we allow an oinain to be able to eat the Karban Pesach at night? It must be because if it was deraisa, you wouldn't be able to eat the Karban Pesach either. But Rav Shimon aninus alayim Rabbanon, is that really true? But Rav Shimon oimer oinain enu mishaleach Karban Oisav. It says that when it comes to an oinain, he's not allowed to send his karbanos. My love feel Pesach. There's mashma even on Pesach. Well, levar Pesach. Avosan you have Shimon Omer Shlomim Kashu Shalem Karban Shlomim when it is whole maybe he can bring it. And maybe Kashu Oinain only while he is whole, but not if he's missing a loved one, which is considered like chaser. Menayin L'Rabba says Hataida. How do we know that also an Oinain you can't bring? Not only cannot bring a shlomim, but also not a taida. So Rabbi this a taida shchena chelos b'simcha kishlomim, because a taida has to be eaten in the state of joy. So this person, he doesn't have his element of simcha because he's an einin. So therefore he can't bring a taida either. Manan the Rabbi says oila. How do we know also an oila where maybe it's not totally by simcha? So remember this oila shechein ba b'nedem v'nedava k'shlamim, because it is comparable in certain elements like a shlamim that it could be brought as a free will offering as the neder and the dava. So therefore it's like in certain ways like a shlamim, and therefore just like an oin can't bring a shlamim, so too an oila. So many rabbis b'chor ma'aser pesach. So we brought all this down to finally get to the word pesach, that an oinin is not allowed to also have a Karban Pesach. Marbini B'chor Ma'aser Pesach, even though these are Kadashim Kalim, nonetheless Shechein Einu Boyin Al Chet. They don't come for sin. So therefore, if it's something for a sin, it's comparable more like a Shlomim. So Menayin L'Rabos Chatus V'Asham. So how would you know those? Talmud Lemer Zevach. So we have this reboy in the pasuk. It says im zevach shlomim karbanoi. So the fact that it says zevach, it includes other karbanos, including a chatas and asham. Menan rabos oifois v'menachos v'yayin v'eitzin v'halvoina. Talmud lemer shlomim karbanoi kol karbanos shehu mevi kashu shalom mevi enu mevi kashu oinin. Getani miya pesach. So we see clearly that an oinin is not allowed to bring a Pesach. Says Rashi, the Bishlam Makulhu. I can understand all the other things. Equal Memer Midrabanan, Vikras Makta Bialma. And these are just psukim. However, of a Pesach Kasha, Adol El Detana Toiva V'Oichel Pischoi. We said beferish that he's allowed to eat the Karban Pesach, which is clearly not. Omar Chisda Pesach Kedei Nitzba. So he says Pesach is actually not even necessary to be brought down over here. In other words, it shouldn't be brought down over here, apparently, because it's not correct that he is allowed to eat the Karban Pesach. My Pesach Shalmi Pesach. It's not referring to the Karban Pesach, it's referring to the Shalmi Pesach. Says Rashi, Chagigas Yudalid Kishachabur Maruba. When you have a very large group, and the Karban Pesach is just not enough, and it has to be eaten Kedei Soiva, so therefore you need also a Chagigas Yudalid so that you are a little bit more full before you eat the Karban Pesach. So that is what it's coming to exclude for an oinen. However, the Pesach itself, the oinen could eat. Nihachi hainu shlomim. So that's the case of a shlomim. So tana shlomim haboyim machmas Pesach, but tana shlomim haboyim machmas atzman. So we mentioned both. One is just stama shlomim, and one is a shlomim which is come machmas Pesach, totally on the Karban Pesach. Again, because you have a large group. If you don't mention the Chagigas Yudal, it's not going to mean a hoyel machmas Pesach. So beguf the Pesach dam b'kamashmon. You would think that it actually has the same status of Pesach, just like an oinen could eat the Pesach, so can he also eat Chagigas Yudal? Kamashmon, he can't. Okay, we're going to stop there. Let's look at question TA20. Ma din aninus laila di yom kavura. What is the din when it comes to the aninos at night of the if there was the day of Kvura. So all he says is here is plukta the tanoi I mutter o aser. Rabbi Rabbanan says it's mutter, and so it's a machlokas. It's basically all it says, which is pretty unbelievable. That answer is a tough answer. I wouldn't have necessarily just written that, but we see this clearly. Aninos lailim in the Rabbanan is according to the sheet of Rav Shimon. However, Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's Aninas Laila is Medivri Torah. So therefore, because of that, okay. So fine. Okay, let's just keep it simple. Just keep it the way it says. Let's see. Rosh Shimon Oinin Toiva V'Leichel Pischal Erev Ichzem Yashiv Imad Yom Rav Shem Kashu Shalom maybe Kashu Oinin Lahana Chamorei De Koin Nami Pesach Gufa. So this actually we did have. Okay, great question. Sadi Testament Bays, and this may actually be the same question as question 1. Actually, let's go before. Let's look at question 1. Matirutzu haGemara al stiras Rav Shimon im oinin ma'isi Pesach the teretz min hashloisha tzalek b'kasha. So this is really where this is the same question as TB 23. So I'm just going to mark that down over here, TB 23. So let's see, the 3 answers, again, let's look at the question. Rav Shimon says that an oinin can bring a Karban Pesach, but apparently we said that you can't, right? So one answer is, let's say he did the mace, died on the 13th, and the burial was on the 14th, so the deraisa is only b'shas misa, that day. The next night, or rather the next day where the kfura on the 14th is only the rabbanon, and therefore it's not a problem at that night. And it says V'Rav Mori Solch B'Kasha. Okay, we had a kasha over there. Abaya said Kan Shemeis Kodim Chatzos V'Nidcha B'Pesach V'Chin Sha'achar Chatzos. We didn't do this yet. Okay, so that was basically. I was like, well, how do I know this? We only did one answer. So TB23 is just scratching the surface. But again, one possible answer, and it says in parentheses over here, Lahana Chamorai da Koi Nami a Pesach Gufa. Because you could say The other answer possibly is referring to the Chagiga Shadalid, right? This an oinain can't eat. Okay? But the Korban Pesach, yes. So that would be a good answer, but that's not what they're looking for, because it says again in question TB, it says Lahachim Roy Dekoi Namia Pesach Gufa. It's not talking about the Shalmei Pesach, okay, which would have been an acceptable answer. Okay, all right, so we'll have to see the next two answers tomorrow, and we'll remind ourselves of the first answer as well. Adkan.